Hello everybody, Feel here. It's been a lot of time since my last video, and there's been a lot of different topics to cover. So I'm going to get right into it, starting off with the Ukraine-Russian war still going on. Russian officials spoke of using nuclear weapons after the many setbacks that they have experienced in Ukraine. There was an explosion which damaged the single bridge between Russia and Crimea, where 3 people were killed in an explosion. Putin called the act a terrorist attack and sought revenge by large-scale airstrikes on several busy cities during rush hour in Ukraine, which killed civilians and knocked out power and heat. Russia has since then done a few different large airstrikes on Ukrainian cities. Russia is also using Iranian kamikaze drones to attack the civilian population. The West needs to increase its air support, I think, to give Ukraine a better chance of being able to handle the amount of air power the Russian military has at its disposal. There was big news not too long ago with Russian forces pulling out of Kherson, a key city in southern Ukraine, which allows Ukraine to bolster its defenses. But even though that is a minor victory for Ukraine, it seems like this war is far from over, and it's hard to say what is going to make this war end. It seems like it's going to continue for a while. There was a huge development with a missile landing in Poland. Poland held an emergency meeting after an explosion killed 2 Polish citizens. This was one of the times where Russia bombarded Ukraine with missiles, and it was the world was wondering if Russia fired a missile in Poland, because since Poland is a NATO country, that could have invoked Article 5 of the defensive part of the alliance, where it'd basically be an act of war and the NATO countries would have to fight Russia together. Basically World War III. That's what people were worried about when the news came out with this missile in Poland. But eventually, after investigation, the Polish government found that the Russian-made missile, and they did talks with world leaders, because at the time world leaders met in Bali, but the Polish government found the missile was not fired from Russia, and that it was a Ukrainian anti-missile air defense system that accidentally landed in Poland. So that narrowly avoided World War III, but it just shows how high the stakes are, first of all, but also just how close we could be to a world war, even accidentally. Yes. Also, the midterm elections happened recently. I say recently because even though the elections were in the beginning of in the beginning of November, the votes were not official for a while. They were still counting votes for a week or two after to make sure that they had the right results. And if you don't know, the midterm elections are very important because it included all House seats, a third of Senate seats, and many of the governor's races around the country. The Senate race between Raphael Warnock and Herschel Walker is going into a runoff election because neither of the candidates got 50% of the vote. So that will be in the beginning of December. But it's not as important as it could have been because the Senate has already been decided. It still is important, but the Senate is already decided with a Democratic majority. The House has transferred from a Democratic majority to a Republican majority, but it is very narrow, the majority for the Republicans in the House. So the red wave did not come at all. Democrats took a lot of the governor's races as well. Gen Z was the deciding factor in the midterms, with much of Gen Z voting in favor of the Democratic Party. So that was great news. A lot of horrible Republican candidates did win re-election, unfortunately, but the red wave didn't come, and a lot of Democratic candidates got elected as well. Where right now the Senate is 50 for the Democrats and 49 for the Republicans. So they already have a majority, even if the Republicans were to win. Kamala Harris, Vice President, would break that tie. So it would just either be the tie that Harris would break, or seeing if Democrats could win 51 seats where they wouldn't need that tie, the deciding vote by the Vice President. And it's only a couple of seats that the House Republicans have them in the majority, so it's going to be very hard for them to get anything done in the House between the QAnon and the extreme sect of the Republican and also the moderate sect of the Republicans. So it's going to be very interesting to see how that happens, what goes on in the House and Senate once the new cycle comes up in early 2023. There also was the first Gen Z candidate elected to Congress, so that was big news as well. The GOP is likely to retain Kevin McCarthy and Mitch McConnell in leadership for the House and Senate. And Nancy Pelosi, the first female Speaker of the House, will step down as Democratic leader, saying that she wanted to basically pass the torch to younger members of Congress. Trump officially launched his re-election campaign bid, where he will surely lose because he's already losing popularity. The midterms didn't look good for him because most of the candidates he endorsed lost, and now he's making even more fool of himself right now. He recently met with a highly racist person and had dinner with him and Kanye. So between that and the amount of challenges it seems like he's going to face, including Ron DeSantis, who seems to be more popular than Trump as of right now. But that will be interesting to see with the presidential election coming up. Meanwhile, Iran is still experiencing massive protests for women's rights following the death of the martyr in Iran, who was killed by Iranian police for not wearing, secret police for not wearing a hijab. We finally have gotten numbers on the amount of protesters who have been killed so far. At least from Iran, they have said that 300 protesters, police, and I think security forces have been killed, where human rights groups say the numbers are actually higher. And thousands of protesters have been arrested, with over 2,000 being charged. So I just want to say the situation in Iran, I really feel for, especially the women who are so oppressed in Iran, not having any rights or basic freedoms, being charged just for protesting their rights, and being restricted so much on what they have to wear. So I really hope that something could come out of this, but unfortunately the government of Iran being so hostile toward these protests and clamping down on them so much, I unfortunately don't see a lot of change being possible. Similarly, if you are not aware, China has been having harsh COVID-19 restrictions. If you remember earlier in the pandemic, early on, China forced people to remain indoors to try and stop COVID-19 from spreading. And recently they've done similar tactics, and they seem to have been doing them for a pretty extensive amount of time. And although China is a communist country that also gives people basically no freedoms or rights, where you don't usually see any sort of protests, there have been rare protests that have happened by some of the Chinese people based on these harsh COVID-19 restrictions. Chants including Unlock Xinjiang, Unlock All of China, and Xi Jinping Step Down, Communist Party Step Down. Now those are very critical words, and a lot of these protesters are most likely going to be detained because, like Iran, China is not going to have any sort of sympathy or leniency with protesters, most likely, but their message is being heard also. And again, I really feel for the Chinese people who are being forced to stay indoors and forced under these harsh conditions because they don't have these freedoms that a lot of people around the world have. So it is very sad, and I'm glad that these people are willing to risk their lives and willing to speak out about it. But unfortunately, again, I don't think they'll be able to change a lot because of how restrictive and how oppressive the Chinese government is. The Supreme Court rejected Trump's request to shield his tax returns, clearing the way to release his taxes to the House, which is very good. But although, since the House is no longer going to be controlled by Democrats in January, they don't have a lot of time to look through his taxes and prosecute him if there's enough time. But hopefully they can at least. They were talking about if they don't have enough time to go through the whole process, they will. It's a possibility that they will make his tax returns public, and I really hope they do that because it seems like. Well, Trump it already is a crook, but it seems like with all he's trying to do to shield his tax returns that he has committed tax fraud, and hopefully he can be prosecuted for that also, along with other crimes he's already committed. A couple weeks ago, sirens went off in Japan after North Korea sent a ballistic missile over the island. North Korea has been more bold as of late. President Biden recently released a national security strategy document focusing on China and Russia specifically, speaking of autocracies versus democracies, and that the U.S. needed to grow their alliances, specifically with India. The UK not too long ago had a replacement of their prime ministers. UK Prime Minister Liz Truss announced her resignation only 6 weeks after being in office, the shortest serving prime minister ever, which is crazy news to think about, that she could only be in charge for only 6 weeks, which is less than 2 months. But that was the case after she resigned. This came after her mini budget came to be criticized. Soon after the news came out, Rishi Sunak became UK Prime Minister after meeting with King Charles III. He is the first person of color from the Conservative Party. I think he's the first person of color to be Prime Minister, and he's also from the Conservative Party. Conservative Party's had a lot of problems with all these changes in leadership, and I think it was talked about the possibility of Boris Johnson coming back, but in the end, Rishi Sunak is the new Prime Minister of the UK. He said that England faces a profound economic challenge and wants to bring the country together. There have been several, and I mean several, school shootings that have happened in the past 2 months. Anyone in the U.S. knows that the U.S. has had a lot of problems lately with shootings, particularly school shootings, and this one is no different. There was a school shooting at a St. Louis high school where 2 people were killed and 7 people were injured. The shooter, of course, carried an AR-15 because most of the time they do, and was only 19 years old. There was a shooting in Colorado Springs at a gay bar where 5 people were killed, 17 were injured, and the person that committed the shooting came from a dysfunctional household and identifies as non-binary. This is a horrible trend that is seeming to continue and get worse. There was also a shooting at a Walmart where a supervisor killed 6 people in Chesapeake, Virginia. The shooter committed suicide as well. And Walmart is being sued by an employee for $50 million, saying that the staff warned management about the shooter and nothing was done. Good for her, and I hope she gets some sort of compensation from Walmart by winning her court case. But it really is tough times with the amount of shootings that we have to deal with in America. And I think a lot of people truly are becoming numb to hearing about a shooting. And there's so many shootings that you don't even hear about all of them, or you might miss the news of one of them. And I really hope that better times are ahead. But until more gun control is done by the federal government, I don't believe anything will change, unfortunately. There was good news, though, that the Buffalo supermarket shooter pled guilty to terrorism and murder, so he most likely will face life in prison or the death penalty. Paul Pelosi, husband of U.S. Speaker Nancy Pelosi, was attacked. Paul Pelosi is 82 years old. There was someone who broke into their house, and the attacker hit Paul Pelosi with a hammer and sent him to the hospital, and he had to undergo skull surgery. I feel bad for Paul Pelosi, and I hope that he eventually will recover from this traumatic event that happened. The attacker targeted Nancy Pelosi, but Nancy Pelosi wasn't home at the time. The attacker went to the hospital as well and will be jailed. And there was also an incident that I felt I had to mention. Unfortunately, there was another police incident where police attacked an unarmed civilian, with San Antonio officer James Brennan being arrested after shooting a 17-year-old boy in a McDonald's parking lot many times, and there was no good reason for him to do so. So, yes, another sad event that happened. But in better news, Brazil's President Bolsonaro lost his re-election bid to former President Luiz Inacio Lula da Silva. Bolsonaro did not concede the race, but he did allow a transfer of power. So that was a good step for Brazil. The U.S. charged former heavyweight boxer Goran Gajic, who is 43 years old, with trafficking of over $1 billion worth of cocaine. Glad he was arrested. There was 3 people that were removed from the set of The View after interrupting an interview with Senator Ted Cruz last month as a climate change protest, which I think was well done. Kanye, who said a lot of really stupid things over the past couple of years, recently got his partnership with Adidas cut because he made anti-Semitic comments, and Adidas did delay cutting their partnership with him, but it was a good move, and Kanye is a horrible person for saying the things he did. Oath Keepers founder Stuart Rhodes was found guilty of January 6th seditious conspiracy, along with other Oath Keeper associates who were indicted as well of convicted of obstructing Congress. Both offenses are punishable for up to 20 years in prison, which you love to see. And NASA successfully crashed a spacecraft into a asteroid to disrupt its orbit, which was a very cool experiment they did. And just today, U.S. beat Iran in the World Cup to advance past them in the group stage to move into the round of 16. Very cool news for the USA. That is all the news I have for you guys today. I hope you enjoy and have a good day. Thank you.